Psychology of growing up without love and its lifelong effects. You sit in a room full of people, yet something feels off. Conversations stay polite, but closeness feels unsafe. When someone gets too near, emotionally or physically, a quiet alarm goes off inside you. You pull back. Later you wonder why connection feels so exhausting, even though you crave it so badly. I've noticed how often this shows up in everyday life, at work, in friendships, in love, especially in people who grew up without consistent care or warmth. The absence wasn't always loud, sometimes it was silence. No comfort, no one to notice the fear. Psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk writes in The Body Keeps the Score. Being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. When love is missing early on, safety itself can feel unfamiliar. And as John Bowlby observed in Attachment and Loss, what cannot be communicated to the mother cannot be communicated to the self. That gap doesn't disappear with age. It quietly shapes a lifetime. Number 1. When love was missing, the nervous system learned to survive. When love is absent in early life, the body adapts long before the mind can explain what's happening. A child doesn't have the option to leave or protest loudly, so the nervous system quietly learns survival strategies, staying alert, staying small, or staying emotionally numb. I've noticed that many adults who grew up this way don't describe their childhood as traumatic, yet their bodies still live as if safety is uncertain. Rest feels unfamiliar. Calm can feel suspicious. From a psychological perspective, this makes sense. Developmental experiences shape how the autonomic nervous system responds to the world. When comfort and reassurance are inconsistent, the body learns that closeness may not come when needed. Over time, vigilance becomes a baseline state. Psychologist Stephen Porges, in the polyvagal theory, explains that safety is the treatment. Without repeated experiences of emotional safety, the nervous system remains organized around protection rather than connection. This survival wiring often continues into adulthood. You may overthink interactions, brace for rejection, or feel emotionally distant even in calm moments. None of this means something is wrong with you. It means your body learned early that love was unreliable, and it did exactly what it needed to do to keep you going. Awareness doesn't erase these patterns overnight, but it does begin to loosen their grip. Number 2. The quiet birth of shame and self-blame. When a child doesn't feel loved, the mind searches for a reason. And because children are naturally self-focused, the explanation often turns inward. Instead of concluding something is missing in my environment, the child concludes something is missing in me. I've seen how this belief can settle deep and remain unspoken for decades, quietly shaping how a person sees their own worth. Psychologist Alice Miller, in The Drama of the Gifted Child, wrote that the truth about our childhood is stored up in our body, and although we can repress it, we can never alter it. Emotional neglect doesn't always leave memories, it leaves conclusions. Shame forms not because a child is criticized, but because love feels conditional or absent. Over time, this creates a sense of being fundamentally flawed or unlovable. In adulthood, this shame often shows up as chronic self-doubt, harsh self-criticism, or the feeling that love must be earned. Achievements don't fully satisfy, and reassurance never seems to last. This is not because you are insecure by nature. It's because your younger self made sense of emotional absence, the only way they could. Understanding this doesn't excuse the pain, but it gently shifts the blame away from who you are, and back toward what you didn't receive. Number 3. Attachment patterns, formed in emotional drought. When love is scarce early on, attachment doesn't disappear, it adapts. A child still needs connection, but learns that closeness may be unpredictable, unsafe, or disappointing. Over time, this shapes how intimacy feels in the body. I've noticed that many adults raised without consistent love don't struggle with relationships because they fear love, but because love feels unfamiliar and unstable at the same time. Attachment theory helps explain this. John Bowlby, in Attachment and Loss, observed that early bonds become working models for how we expect others to respond to us. If care was inconsistent or absent, the model says don't rely too much, don't need too much, or cling tightly before love disappears. These patterns can show up as emotional avoidance, anxious attachment, or swinging between the two. In adult relationships, this often feels confusing. You may crave closeness yet pull away when it arrives, or tolerate distance while feeling lonely inside. These are not signs of immaturity. They are learned strategies from a time when connection wasn't safe enough to trust. Seeing attachment patterns as adaptations, not defects, can soften self-judgment and open space for change. Number 4. Emotional regulation, without a guide. Children learn how to handle emotions by being helped through them. When that guidance is missing, feelings don't nannies, they remain unorganized. I've seen how many adults who weren't loved as children struggle not because they feel too much, but because no one taught them what to do with what they feel. Developmental psychologist Daniel J. Siegel explains in The Developing Mind that emotion regulation develops within relationships. Without someone to name, soothe and validate emotional states, the nervous system is left to manage alone. This often leads to overwhelm, emotional shutdown, or sudden intensity that feels out of proportion to the moment. As adults, this can look like anxiety that appears without warning, difficulty calming down, or the habit of suppressing feelings until they surface as exhaustion or irritability. These reactions are not personal weaknesses. They reflect an early environment where emotions had to be managed privately. Learning regulation later in life is possible, but it begins with recognizing that you were never taught, not that you failed to learn. Number 5. The lifelong search for validation. When love is missing in childhood, the desire to be seen doesn't disappear, it intensifies. Many adults carry a quiet hunger for validation, not because they are needy, but because affirmation was scarce when it mattered most. I've observed how this often turns into a pattern of proving being useful, impressive, reliable, or emotionally self-sufficient, all in hopes that worth will finally feel secure. Psychologist Carl Rogers, in On Becoming a Person, wrote that the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. For those raised without love, self-acceptance feels risky. Validation learned to come from performance, not presence. Praise may feel relieving for a moment, yet never settles deeply, because it addresses behavior rather than being. This can lead to overachievement, people-pleasing, or an inability to rest without guilt. Underneath is often a younger self still asking, "Am I enough now?" Recognizing this pattern is powerful. It reframes the search for validation not as vanity or insecurity, but as a logical response to emotional scarcity, and it opens the door to building worth from the inside, instead of chasing it from others. Number 6. Reparenting the self and rewriting the inner story. Healing from a loveless childhood does not mean reliving the past. It means responding differently to its echoes. What was missing then can slowly and imperfectly be provided now. I've come to believe that growth begins when compassion replaces self-criticism and curiosity replaces shame. Psychologist Winnicott, in Playing and Reality, emphasized that emotional health comes from having one's inner experience recognized. When this didn't happen in childhood, the task becomes internal. Reparenting is not pretending the past was different. It is learning to offer yourself safety, structure, and emotional presence in the present. This may look like naming your feelings without judgment, setting boundaries without guilt, or allowing rest without earning it. These acts can feel unnatural at first because they contradict old survival rules. But with time, they create a new internal relationship, one where your needs are no longer invisible. Healing doesn't erase what happened, yet it changes who has authority over your story now. Conclusion: you were never unlovable. You were unmet. Not being loved as a child leaves a mark, but it does not define the truth of who you are. The patterns you carry, the vigilance, the self-doubt, the longing to be seen, were not signs of weakness. They were intelligent responses to an environment that asked too much of you too early. I've come to understand that what feels like a flaw is often a memory the body refuses to forget. Psychologist John Bowlby writes, in The Myth of Normal, that trauma is not what happens to you, but what happens inside you as a result of what happened to you. The pain was never that you were unworthy of love, but that love was not consistently available when your nervous system was forming its expectations of the world. That absence shaped you, but it does not sentence you. Healing is not about becoming someone new. It is about finally meeting the parts of you that learned to survive alone, and offering them the safety they never received. When you understand this, shame begins to loosen, self-compassion becomes possible, and growth feels less like fixing yourself and more like coming home to yourself.